When Princess Diana died on the 31st of August 1997, the world stopped. Flowers piled outside Kensington Palace in their millions. Grown men wept on live television. A nation, and really the entire world, went into a kind of collective shock that no one had quite prepared for. But while the mourning was still raw, while the cameras were still rolling and the tributes were still pouring in, something else was quietly unfolding behind closed doors. A legal document, signed, dated, specific. Diana, Princess of Wales, had written a will. And what that will revealed, who she chose, what she left behind, and what she deliberately excluded, sent tremors through the British establishment that are still being felt today. Because this was not just a list of possessions. This was a final statement. A last act of agency from a woman who had spent years fighting for control of her own life. The question is, who did Diana trust above everyone else? And when you find out, truly find out, you have to ask yourself what she was trying to tell us. To understand the weight of Diana's will, you need to understand the world she was leaving behind. Diana Frances Spencer married Prince Charles on the 29th of July, 1981. 750 million people watched that wedding on television. She was 20 years old. He was 32. And from almost the very beginning, accounts suggest the marriage was troubled in ways the palace was desperate to conceal. By the late 1980s, the fairy tale had quietly collapsed. Charles had resumed his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. Diana, by her own account, most powerfully in the 1995 Panorama interview with Martin Bashir, was isolated, struggling, and fighting what she described as a deeply lonely battle inside an institution that did not understand her. "There were 3 of us in this marriage," she told Bashir. That phrase became one of the most quoted lines in modern British history. In August 1996, the divorce was finalized. Diana lost the title Her Royal Highness. She retained the title Princess of Wales. She received a settlement reported at the time to be in the region of £17 million, along with her apartments at Kensington Palace. What she did not retain was a formal role within the royal family. She was, in the eyes of the institution, no longer one of them, but she was still their mother. William was 14 at the time of the divorce. Harry was 11. And by every credible account, from biographers, from friends, from Diana herself, those 2 boys were the absolute center of her world. She threw herself into her public work with renewed energy after the separation. The Landmines campaign, her HIV and AIDS advocacy at a time when that required genuine courage. Her visits to hospitals, hospices, and homeless shelters that were not choreographed for cameras but driven. Those who knew her insisted by something real. Diana updated her will in 1993, 4 years before her death. That timing matters, because 1993 was a year of particular turbulence. The separation from Charles had been announced the previous December, and Diana was navigating what it meant to exist somewhere between royal and civilian, between public figure and private person. She was thinking about the future, and she was deciding deliberately and carefully what that future should look like for the people she loved. The will itself was not a complicated document by the standards of royal estates. Diana's net worth at the time of her death was estimated at between £20 and £21 million. This included her personal jewelry collection, pieces of extraordinary historic and sentimental value, her clothing, her personal effects, and various financial assets accumulated over the course of her life and her divorce settlement. There were specific bequests. Her butler, Paul Burrell, who remained fiercely loyal to her and would later become one of the most controversial figures in the aftermath of her death, received a bequest. Certain friends and members of her personal staff were remembered. But the core of the estate, the bulk of everything Diana had, was divided between her 2 sons. William and Harry were named as the primary beneficiaries. Each would inherit their share when they turned 25. If either son died before that age, his share would pass to the other. That part was not surprising. That was what you would expect. But there was a letter. Separate from the formal legal will, Diana had written what is commonly described as a letter of wishes. A document that, while not legally binding in the same way as a will, expressed her personal intentions for how her estate should be managed and distributed in ways the will itself could not fully capture. Royal commentators and biographers, including Tina Brown in her extensively researched biography, the Diana Chronicles, have written about the emotional and personal dimensions of Diana's estate planning in significant detail. And what emerged over time was this. Diana had included a provision, a wish formally expressed, that a portion of her estate be given to her godchildren. She had over a dozen godchildren. She wanted them remembered. But that was only the beginning, because what Diana's estate planning also revealed was something that cut far deeper than the financial details. It revealed who she had chosen to trust as executors of her wishes, who she had placed in charge of her legacy, and what instructions, according to those close to her, she had left regarding the institution she was no longer formally part of. What no one knew at the time was how bitterly disputed that legacy would become. Here is what the records show. Diana's will named her mother, Frances Shand Kidd, and her sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, as the primary executors of her estate. Not the palace, not Charles, not a royal official of any kind. Her family, her blood family, the Spencers, the people who existed entirely outside the institution that had, in her own words, made her feel like a prisoner. This was not an accident. This was not a default legal arrangement. This was a choice, a deliberate, documented, legally binding choice that Diana made years before her death, at a time when she was clear-eyed about what the royal family was and what it was not. And the significance of that choice became explosive almost immediately after her death. Because the palace, according to multiple accounts from people close to the situation at the time, had its own ideas about how Diana's estate and legacy should be managed. There were questions about her personal correspondence, about her jewelry and where it should go, about her apartments at Kensington Palace and what would happen to their contents. Paul Burrell, Diana's butler, later claimed in accounts that were disputed but never fully disproven that he had taken a large number of Diana's personal belongings into his own safekeeping at her instruction, to protect them. He was arrested in 2001 and faced trial for theft, in what became one of the most sensational legal cases of that era. The case collapsed in November 2002 when Queen Elizabeth, reportedly, suddenly recalled that Burrell had informed her he was taking items for safekeeping in the weeks after Diana's death. The prosecution was abandoned. Burrell walked free. What that moment exposed was the extraordinary degree to which Diana's estate had become a battleground. Between the Spencers, between the palace, between those who loved her and those who feared what she represented. Earl Spencer, Diana's brother Charles, who had delivered that shattering eulogy at Westminster Abbey in which he implicitly accused the royal family of contributing to her destruction, was deeply involved in the administration of her estate. The Spencer family took control of the Diana Memorial Fund, established after her death to carry forward her charitable legacy. That fund raised hundreds of millions of pounds. It became the subject of significant controversy regarding how its resources were managed and licensed. But beneath all of that institutional complexity, the emotional core of Diana's final wishes was this. She wanted her sons to be protected. She wanted her personal legacy controlled by people who loved her as a person, not as a symbol. She chose family over institution. And in doing so, she drew a line, a clear, legal, permanent line, between Princess Diana the Royal and Diana Spencer the woman. She decided, even in death, who she truly was. The reaction to the details of Diana's will, when they became public in March 1998, roughly 6 months after her death, was significant, though not entirely surprising. The public response was largely one of quiet approval. Diana had left her estate to her boys. She had remembered her godchildren. She had, in the view of many observers, behaved with exactly the kind of warmth and personal loyalty that the public had always believed defined her. But inside the palace and among royal commentators, the reaction was considerably more complex. The question of the godchildren's bequests, in particular, attracted attention. Diana had expressed the wish that each of her godchildren receive personal items from her estate. Jewelry, mementos, objects with meaning. Some of those godchildren received what was intended for them. Others, according to accounts from people familiar with the process, did not, or received their bequests only after prolonged delays and negotiations. Royal biographer Sarah Bradford, writing in the years after Diana's death, described the administration of the estate as having been, and here we are paraphrasing, not quoting directly, marked by a degree of complexity that went well beyond what Diana could have anticipated. The Burrell affair was the most public expression of that complexity. But it was not the only one. There were ongoing questions about Diana's personal letters, correspondence with close friends, with her therapist, with figures in public life, about what happened to certain personal items, about the gap between what Diana had wished and what actually occurred. For William and Harry, the inheritance itself was not immediately available. Under the terms of the will, they would not access their full portions until the age of 25. William reached that age in 2007. Harry in 2009. Both princes have spoken at various points about the continued presence of their mother in their lives, her values, her approach to people, her belief in service done from genuine feeling rather than obligation. Harry, in his memoir Spare, published in January 2023, described grief over his mother in terms that were raw and unresolved even 25 years after her death. Whatever the will provided materially, the emotional inheritance and the weight of it is something no legal document could ever fully address. Step back from the legal details for a moment. What does it actually mean that Diana chose the Spencers over the palace? That she placed her mother and sister in charge of her legacy? That she went to the effort, years before her death, of constructing a set of wishes that deliberately bypassed the institution she had married into? It tells us something profound about the nature of the British monarchy, and about the impossible position Diana occupied within it. The royal family is not simply a family. It is an institution, a legal entity, a political construct with interests that extend far beyond any individual member. Diana understood that. She understood it in a way she perhaps did not when she married at 20 years old, dazzled and hopeful and entirely unprepared for what lay ahead. By the time she wrote that will, she had learned the lesson completely. She knew that the palace would protect the institution before it protected the individual. She had experienced that truth firsthand. And so she built, in the one document that would survive her, a set of walls around the things she valued most. There is something quietly defiant about that, and something deeply human, because what Diana was doing, what every parent does when they write a will, was trying to extend their love beyond the moment of their own existence. She was trying to make sure that the people she loved would be looked after, that her values would carry forward, that the things she had cared about would not simply be absorbed into a system that had never fully understood her. Royal commentators have often noted that Diana, in death, became more powerful than she was in life. Her image, her work, her words continue to shape the monarchy decades on, in the causes her sons champion, in the way the institution has been forced to reckon with its own opacity. She did not plan for that, but she did plan for her boys. And perhaps, in the end, that is the most honest and the most moving truth of all. Diana died at 36 years old. She had packed into that 36 years enough love, enough loss, enough public life and private anguish to fill several lifetimes. And in the final years, she had done something quietly remarkable. She had chosen herself. The will was not just a legal document. It was a declaration. Said, I know who I am. I know who I trust. And I want the record to show it. Whatever the complications that followed, the disputes, the controversies, the long shadow of grief, that declaration remains. Clear, permanent, hers. Diana's story continues to teach us things. About power and about love. About what it costs to live authentically inside an institution built for something else entirely. If these are the kinds of stories you come here for, the real ones, the ones beneath the headlines, then you already know what to do. Subscribe, because there is always more to uncover.